which exists with divided legacies within each of the great Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, each grow from divided roots, some of which are harmonious and some of which are discordant with the language of freedom. How to be a contender. Yes, young teacher, old teacher, we must be contenders. And the wide world and its strife are part of this struggle. With Ferguson, teachers must understand the plate tectonics of colonialism. We must study deeply and not just the mechanics of our profession. We must not bury ourselves in the deluge of inconsequential information that is at our fingertips and the internet. With Ferguson and with Ayotzinapa, teachers must understand the depth of the colonial experience and the slave trade. The way both work to form the continent of modern capitalism, where the engineering of the division of labor was part of another legacy of the Enlightenment. Support for this trade in humanity came from deep within the Christian hierarchy, but the voice of Dr. King also came from there, as did the voices of a generation of religious dissenters in Central and South America. Those who inspired Paulo Freire, while the established church turned a blind eye to oppression. Marginalizing and exploiting minorities, where all values were secondary to the profit motive, was central to this activity, and was enabled by an ideology of schooling as training only, not free inquiry, dissent, questioning, and autonomy, authorship for your own life, and authorship chances for your students. In another important moment in this great book, The Republic, Socrates imagines a city, a real city, where the existence of greed, love of power, money, all play a role, and they deform education. In truth, all people have the same range of potential if given the same education. Since in truth, this is fact, we must face the notion that the development of servitude and slavery, which fuels wealth, social classes, cannot be found in nature. They must be created. And he unfolds a metaphor where you create them by teaching the children that some are leaders, some are military, some are just workers. And when you say this in the first generation, you know it's a lie. But you know that it will stay because you've taught children and they don't know it's a lie. This myth of the metals. What do we build from our metals that we mine? Are they to build swords, or are they to build plows? For freedom or confinement? For war or bread? For what? For whom? What use do we put them? Socrates also said, early in the Republic, one of our central problems, and the problem of politics worldwide, the problem of knowing friends and enemies, and the mistakes we make about who our friends are and who our enemies are. This metaphor frames the foundation of injustice unfolding both in Ferguson and Ayotzinapa. Some are born to lead, some to wealth, some born to serve. This is ideological justification for social neglect, numbness to suffering, and both indifference to and encouragement of violence against those who would challenge this order. For remember, only the first generation knows that this is what Plato called a lie worthy of its name, a real lie. Their children will take this lie as the central truth of their human possibility. And this ongoing lie is why it is so difficult to convince children who have been treated like lead that they truly can be gold. That's the radical and radial power of the teacher, moving outward and moving deep. It's the power to disrupt a lie and build a new story. And that's difficult. I want to read a blog entry from that useful part of the internet that does magnify the language of freedom. It's a blog from Berkeley University in California. This young scholar wrote, she says, perhaps the most depressing aspect of the story of Ayotzinapa is the indifference of some Mexicans that have even attempted to argue that the normalistas, who are the teachers' college students, somehow deserve their fate because of their rebellious attitude and their delinquent appearance. Thus, a society already divided by social class, skin color, linguistic differences, clothing styles, the size of one's bank account, zip codes, and a host of other ridiculous matters, has found new ways to demarcate differences between Mexican people. Good versus bad, friends and enemies. Those who receive justice versus those who do not. And those who don't even deserve an effort. Meanwhile, Mexican political parties are only interested in representing and advancing their own interests. The left has lost its identity in its efforts to reach power in Mexico. She writes, the right, which is more concerned with maintaining the appearance of good behavior, has shrouded itself in silence and indifference. Thus, politicians are involved in the neglect. Ayotzinapa reveals the deterioration of political and social spheres. The missing normalistas are poor, indigenous, mestizo, mixed race, and brown skin. Their hair is straight. They're not very tall. They speak with the accents of the country. They're Mexicans. The divide between Mexicans has become so great that some are not even moved by the heartrending pain experienced by the parents whose sons are missing. And in this case, the missing are boys, all boys. And finally, I'll close with a little more of a viewpoint on the role, intellectual role of Socrates. His danger, his crime that he was punished for, was not that he was a teacher, and a troublesome one at that, but that he was a teacher educator. He taught a set of inquiries and the value of questioning and inquiry, questions that were not domesticated by power but free. He showed how to be that sort of teacher. The teacher's legacy would be passed down then. It would be unstoppable. It won't end in his generation or with his death. That's why he was dangerous. And that also is why the teachers in a teacher's college involved in the language of freedom are viewed as dangerous by the powers that have taken over Mexico and many other parts of the world. One of the difficulties for teachers in training is to go beyond training and to explore the deep, wide, and sometimes frightening world. A complex world where, for example, you have to keep your eye on the global political economic changes that are affecting all of us around the world. One of the changes has been a globalization that has been advertised as freedom, free trade, more freedom, more freedom. But it is masked by a truth where that freedom has allowed companies to dump enormous amounts of corn in a country that grows corn in its little farms. And suddenly, millions of Mexicans can't make a living. They have to flee the country. As they leave, as they become disorganized, drug gangs, madmen who have turned their minds and lives over to that trade will do anything to keep their power. Yes, these are criminals. Their crimes are fed and nourished by the greed of global operators who are creating so-called free trade zones, who are also creating conditions which say the teachers' colleges like this one, teachers' colleges like Ayotzinapa, teachers' colleges like Northern Arizona University, must stick to training, focus on training, because we have competitive national exams that are going to show how great we are in our countries. And so the language of freedom is determined by bankers who enforce a language of multiple choice knowledge. Multiple choice knowledge, which never contained the language of freedom, but is now being enforced by mega banks globally. These are realities. Finally, Ayotzinapa is part of a tradition of institutions and people who speak truth to power. Commitments are built in such institutions, where teachers' authority grows not just on the machinery of current power, because it passes, but on the ideals of the communities we live in, their histories, and the world enlightenment at its best, not at its mechanical worst. We must not limit our inquiries in the misguided faith that the power of exposure alone will bend the arc toward justice. But we must fill these millions and thousands and tens of thousands of classrooms that are open all day and are full of kids finding a way for the language of freedom to grow, even in the very busy garden of multiple choice education. Today, millions of teachers, students work toward justice. Many are watching this week as memorials like this one are broadcast worldwide. Memorials of the fallen circulated around the world in another best use of this miracle of the internet. They're fighting the darkness. They're working not to let the forces of injustice intimidate by their murder of brothers and sisters, these students and Michael Brown. For while horrific and spectacular, these sacrifices are rare. Their work and their sacrifice should inspire us and not be dimmed in the blur of memory and forgotten, and not be dimmed in the buzz and blur of the internet that challenges our concentration and our focus. Their work and their sacrifice, for every loss, 1,000 educators must follow the arc of enlightenment that bends toward justice. The language of freedom and true democracy, a necessary truth, worthy of its name, not a lie. The hope must be kept alive by light. And light's the work of teachers. You. Me. I'll close this with a poem I found by an author, a builder, a maker, the language of freedom, whom I discovered since coming to Turkey. One who suffered for the language of freedom, Nazim Hikmet. And he talks about the great humanity. The great humanity. The deck passenger on the ship. Third class on the train. On foot, on the causeway. A great humanity. Great humanity does not work. Pardon. The great humanity goes to work at 8. Marries at 20. Dies at 40. The great humanity. There's enough bread for all except for the great humanity. It's the same for rice, for sugar, for cloth, for books. There's enough for all except the great humanity. The great humanity has no shade on his soil, no lamp on his road, no glass in his window. But the great humanity has hope. You can't live without hope. Thank you. Any comments or thoughts are most welcome. Sit. I'm old. I'll keep my comments brief. I hate it when I go to a conference and someone gives a talk and they're asked a question and they give another talk. So, and also room for other questions. Yes, I mean, the most important one that I've thought about recently is the smallest one, the one that you would never think of. And that is, we forget as teachers and we forget as students the buildings and the curriculum and the vast archipelago, extended archipelago of public education. We forget that those buildings are open every day almost, all year round. They're full of kids who must go there. You know, that's a kind of common sense. And one thing I would like to say, after one of the great theorists of the language of freedom, who also did so much work from in prison, Tony Abramsky, he talked about the work of the educator is to take common sense that's disruptive and destructive and change it and say, no, it's not common sense to oppress. But I'd like to turn that on the common sense of those on the progressive side who forget that we have schools. And there's a lot of time in those schools. Lots of time. And yes, there's pressure and difficulty, but we forget the simple fact. If you just imagine that you landed on a planet where your only hope to become a human being are these buildings. And you suddenly saw them, and they're everywhere. You can walk to one. In almost every developed country, you can walk, and they're there. That sounds silly, but that undermines the common sense that we have testing, we have multiple choice, we have central exams, we have standardization, we have focusing on our barriers. They're real, never forget them, but don't forget, yeah, these are big buildings, and they're full of kids.
Bir şey sorabilir miyim? Şimdi eğitim deyince şöyle bir şey kafamda canlanıyor benim. Hani
eğitim böyle edilgen bir şey, işte biri birine bir şey öğretiyor. Genellikle de çocuklara öğretiyor işte. Bir de hayvanlar geliyor aklıma, işte hayvana bir şey öğretiyor. Ateş çemberinden geçiyor falan. Hani çok haz etmediğim bir şey aslında benim eğitim, ama hani bundan kaçmanın falan da bir şeyi yok, hani çaresi yok. Peki eğitim, anne ne yapsın? Hani sadece öğretmenin mi işi bu? Anne ne yapsın çocuğuna bir şey öğretmek için, ya da hani o dayatılan şeyin olmadığını, aslında onun gerçek olmadığını, başka bir şeyin de var olabileceğini öğretmek için ne yapsın?
So when we talk about education, it's usually a transmissive approach. You know, there is this information transmitted into new generation. So she doesn't like the concept of schooling actually much. And she's asking a question as a mother. So there is this schooling and she has to send the child to school. But as a mother, what can she do? And how can she show a different way of looking at things as a mother for her child?
There are so many places that a parent looks and must look, sometimes desperately, for the best access to education. And many parents will pull together their private resources in a very serious effort to for their child to find his or her way into a school where they can gain access to hope and access to a positive approach to their education. And that is one struggle that every parent must face, and there are limits to that. But those private experiences, when your child's future seems in your imagination dependent on those private experiences, may not be as crucial or as important as you think. And that your ability to find public spaces is important. And to remain in communication with whatever officials, or teachers, or community people have influence on that public space. The public space still exists. It is still public. And until there is new documentation, there is a constitution in the United States and one in Turkey that guarantees education for children. It does not say it guarantees training. Just training. Education. So demanding at every step. Education. Entry into the languages of freedom and inquiry. Is a conversation that no parent should be intimidated from engaging in. Also, marshaling the resources of your home library and your home education by all means necessary are important tools. Right? There are others better informed than I could provide. That's my best thought right now. You're entering the most important world there is to enter. I remember when I was doing what you did, I was going to become a history teacher at your age, thinking about what to do and being overwhelmed, and walking into my practice classrooms and getting angry at those little people. They don't seem to like me too much. They're not easy to deal with. You're very welcome. Any other questions or comments? This is the first pedagogical tool that I learned when I was in Teachers College. It's called wait time. you know, if you have any inquiries that you'd like to make, please send them to my email address. I'll back up.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. There's my email, by the way, if you want to contact me. Sure.
What can teachers do to support the freedom of the students in classrooms?
By freedom of the students in classrooms, can you say a little more what you're thinking?
What are the small things to do practices, exercises? Like?
It's my lucky day. Because you're sitting right next to a teacher. I pick on Garol. He's in my seminar, our seminar. And the difference between how Garol conducts his class and other teachers is illustrative, where the development of relationship is key. Too many teachers are afraid to develop relationship. Healthy, honest, but warm, friendly, demanding sometimes, making sure that no one in public, because it's a public institution, takes away the notion that the best education we ever receive is in a home, and that school can be a home. It starts with relationship, and then it starts with small choices, like Garol has made, choices to say, all right, instead of lecturing from the geography book that they're required to do, they will learn the material, they need it, there are tests. But we're going to have an event that is like the events in the life of our democratic world. We're going to sit in small groups and converse. Boys and girls together, talking honestly about some issue that emerges from the study. That's a very powerful, small decision. That's one example. And there are many others. But it's taking that day, that long day, all those kids, and doing a few things that refuses to treat children like mechanics for someone else's project, but imagines them as the makers, the authors of their own books, their own projects, their own discourse. Just imagining that every child is an author, a creator, and that your authority has the word in it, in English, author, authority, and derives from all the great authors of our freedom, our imagination. You can do that. You can fill a classroom up with a lot of things. A lot of things.
We are talking about the freedom and the language of freedom, but as teachers, we have to, we have to be what the system of the administrators or the Minister of Education in Turkey. How about that? I mean, how should we? We are trying to build the freedom under the pressure of the ministries of education or the administrators of the institutions we are working for.
One thing I think would be good to always develop is historical memory. The centralization of education, the establishment of curriculum itself. Curriculum. Oh, these books, I have to teach this subject, the subjects, the curriculum, the whole engineered architecture